Nice to see you all.
I'm coming up. Yeah, unless you have any announcements. Announcements. All right. So you probably saw. So welcome everyone. So Elizabeth had a family emergency, couldn't come tonight. So the risky substances and the food addiction. So I figured I would do the food addiction part two of the calorie density weight management class that we did a few weeks ago. So I can cover the food addiction, and if we have time, I can do behavior change too. But I just also wanted to discuss, since we got to cover the other pillars. We kind of all know to not smoke and not drink alcohol. And actually, even we used to think, even in the last couple of years, we'd say, oh, long for in the medical field, as long as you don't have more than one drink per day average for a female and two drinks a day average for a male. So that would be 7 drinks in a week for a female, 14 drinks in a week for a male, and that would be considered in moderation, would be okay. But now with the newer data coming out saying that there's really no safe amount of alcohol, it's actually a carcinogen. And so especially with like things like breast cancer, we actually have data that shows even there is really no safe amount of alcohol, so it's better to not drink at all. so so just if you like wine, it's like the have some grapes instead kind of a thing. But if you're having a glass once a couple times a year or once a month, it's probably going to be okay. But everyone deserves to have that information. And then also, and we all know about the smoking and then other recreational drugs and stuff, staying away from those. And then we also include, with risky substances, we also include prescription medications in that, because it's actually the third leading cause of death in this country. I think more like fourth now, is prescription medications. So even taking them as prescribed is one of the top causes of death. So side effects and all of that. So that's always another reason when someone says, "Well, I'm not going to change my diet and lifestyle. I'm just going to take the statins. I'm just going to take these blood pressure pills, all these pills." It's not, it doesn't come without risk. And so that's why lifestyle is so important, because there's only good side effects with that. So that all goes together with avoiding risky substances, besides the obvious ones, the prescription medications. So does anyone have any questions about that aspect? That's a whole pillar of lifestyle medicine, is avoiding risky substances. Questions, comments about any of that? No? Okay. All right. Oh, thanks. Yeah. I'm pinch hitting here. So all right. All right. So food addiction and behavior change. Next slide. All right. Substance abuse has many forms. So you see up on top, it's heroin, a spoon, syringe, and then big bottles of Coca-Cola and big pizza. So so there are different levels of addiction, and we're going to get into that. But both of those slides, that's still addiction by definition, because those foods are unnaturally addicting. The high sugar, salt, fat, high calorie dense foods. Next slide. All right. So I'm going to bore you with a little bit of science here, because I like to do that, right? So it's always good to kind of start off with what's called the motivational triad. And has anyone in here read the book The Pleasure Trap by Alan Goldhammer and Doug Lyle? It's a really good one. It's on our book
You
list on the
motherfucker.
livelifestylemedicine.com website. If you look at the book list, you'll see it there. And there's some of the other ones I'm referring to in tonight's talk are on there as well, about food addiction and different things. And so that's really a book I'd really highly recommend reading. Kind of gives you, I'll explain to you what the motivational triad is, but that's a really good to get kind of a deeper level of understanding about this whole topic of food addiction. Is really important concepts to learn. So seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and conserving energy. So it doesn't matter what kind of organism you are, whether you're a paramecium, a bacteria, um, any kind of animal, a human, we all fall under the motivational triad. So we all want to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. So a good example of that in nature, just to give you a real basic understanding, is like if you're hungry and you're standing in a field and you look about 50 yards away, you see an apple tree, and on the low branches of the tree, you see a bunch of ripe apples, ripe fruit. And so you go, okay, yeah, it looks good. I'm hungry, and you go and you know how you just reach up and you pick it. So very little amount of energy was expended, not much risk for it. You didn't have any pain. There was no risk of pain in obtaining that apple. You take a bite and it's like, oh, it wasn't as ripe as I thought. It doesn't taste very sweet. Oh gosh, but look at on that next tree over there, way at the top, there's a really ripe looking one. And so we all as organisms are going to make a judgment. We're going to say, well, is it worth it? Okay, so that one looks really good, but I'm going to have to walk further. I'm going to have to climb the tree, and I might, it might cause me pain. I could have consequences to climbing that tree and getting that apple. But when you do, you get the reward because that apple is really sweet. But just as an example, that those are judgments our brain makes all the time. We're always like assessing what's the risk, what's the benefit. We're always working off this motivational triad: seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and conserving energy. So next, go ahead and go to the next slide. So it's important to kind of think about that when you're going through these next topics. So just to kind of put it into an actual context of a laboratory research, a rat will choose cocaine over food every time, even though its life depends on the food. So what they do is they'll have like different scenarios set up with those are on rat experiments where the rat can go and push a little lever and out will come cocaine, or it can push a different lever and out will come food. And the rat needs food to survive, but what happens with when they do the cocaine, it floods dopamine so unnaturally, it stimulates that pleasure center. So the pleasure is so overwhelming that it's going to choose the cocaine, push the lever for that every time. It's not going to push the food to the point where it will starve to death and die. And so that can be overridden, and we're going to talk about that's the pleasure trap it's falling into. And so it'll do the same thing with like sex as well. So there's another opposite sex rat in the other cage, can push a lever, go in and mate with it, or it can do the cocaine, and it's going to choose the cocaine every time. It's not going to reproduce. It's going to starve to death. It's because it's wanting this flood of dopamine from the cocaine. So it's just an example of that pleasure trap can be overridden. I mean, the motivational triad can be overridden if the pleasure is so through the roof, then you fall into what's called the pleasure trap. So food addiction is another example, and we're going to be talking much more about that. But yeah, again, if you want to learn much more about that, there's the book Pleasure Trap by Doug Lisle. He's a psychologist, and Alan Goldhammer. Alan Goldhammer, he actually works at the True North Health Center. If some of you are familiar with that, where they do the water only fasting. Go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, we're going to see if we have a couple of videos here. We'll see if they play and if we have sound. If not, I can easily explain kind of the gist of what's in both of these videos. These are two Dr. Greger videos to kind of explain the kind of the how the dopamine works in the brain, and they have MRIs that they've evaluated just to show what's happening in the brain when these things happen. You can just go forward in the slide, so then it'll go to the next video. And then what the next video, and you can watch these on, you can look these up on nutritionfacts.org if you want to get actually see and hear those. So it's what it's showing is that fat does the same thing. So high fat foods will also hit the same areas of the brain that stimulate pleasure, dopamine at unnaturally high levels. So you can go ahead and advance the slide. Right. You can just stay right there. Okay. So knowing that physiology, we know that this is what happens. And so this is like good examples when you start going from the standard American diet, which is super high in calorie density, super high in sugar, salt, and fat. That's all unnaturally flooding our brain with dopamine. So then when you all of a sudden one day decide you went to our talk and or saw Charlie's all the food Charlie eats every day, and you suddenly 100% go live with Charlie and eat all that food, it's going to feel really wrong. It's going to feel like, oh my gosh, this is like not enough flavor. This is not doing anything for me. It's like I know it's healthy and I'll eat it and I'm going to do it, but it feels wrong because your dopamine sensitivity, you're used to having dopamine stimulation way up here, and then eating all this unprocessed whole plant food is way down here. So your dopamine sensitivity needs to come down. It's way high. It's unnaturally high. And yeah, you might get when you eat some really ripe fruit after eating some of those meals, you'll get a little bump up in dopamine. It's going to give you some pleasure, but not to where it is with ice cream and Snickers bars and donuts and all these kinds of things, ice cream and all that. And so it takes time. It can take weeks sometimes. It can take months sometimes. But that dopamine sensitivity comes back down to what's more natural in our environment. Because if you're eating, once you've been eating this way for a while, then you eat that fruit, it's really going to feel right. Then after a while, it just takes time. And it's going to feel right. So that's kind of what's going on physiologically in our brains and our bodies when we have this. That doesn't necessarily mean we're addicted. There's different levels. So normal eaters can do this. We have normal eaters, emotional eaters, and food addicts. And so normal eaters, when overweight, will use willpower to make different food choices to lose weight. So we've all kind of like, oh yeah, I can control this a bit. I'm going to lower my calorie density because what you learned in class, and you can lose a little bit of weight, but then sometimes life happens and you might go up and down, up and down. So that's kind of what we would consider normal eaters, and everyone's kind of can be on this spectrum. And then emotional eating is using food to self-medicate for comfort from underlying emotional issues. So that's like, yeah, it's really been a stressful day, or I'm celebrating. What are the kinds of foods we tend to eat when we are when we're stressed or when we're having a celebration? It tends to be foods that are really high in calorie density, high in sugar, salt, and fat, processed, more the unnatural foods. And because in nature, the only time we ever had anything similar to that was like if you came across a beehive and got honey. So if you or tons of ripe fruit, then that would be a time when, oh wow, this is lots of calories, and so I should eat this, and so we're programmed to want that. But that's very rare that you would find a beehive and eat honey. But your brain would remember that, like if you were living in the hunter gatherer days, you'd be like, oh, I remember right where that tree was, where the honey was, because there is a big reward for that. Lots of calories in a short period of time. That motivational triad, and it would flood the dopamine. But that's kind of the only natural setting where there is unnaturally high calorie density or high sugary type of a food would be the honey. But when we know we can go, we've had a hard day and we can just go through the drive-through, we can go to the 7-Eleven and get donuts and candy and all this kind of stuff. That's going to really flood that dopamine. And so one of the things you want to use when with an emotional eater is something called HALT. HALT, it means you're hungry, you're angry, you're lonely, you're tired. And so there's a whole video on the website. I'll get to it towards the end, but where you can actually see the willpower instinct. It's the health psychologist, and she has a whole talk on willpower instinct, and you can watch that as well. But when we go to these places, when we have those things happen, we reach for those kinds of foods because we're not really using our frontal lobe of our brain at that point. So the frontal lobe is where all your goals are, everything you learned in class, okay, this is what I need to do. Here's my plan. These are my health goals. That's all the frontal lobe of the brain. But when you're not getting enough sleep, when you're stressed, when you're really, not exercising, and you're just trying to survive, you don't use the frontal lobe of the brain anymore. You revert to the amygdala, which is in the mid part of the midbrain, and that part of your brain just wants to be soothed. That part of your brain doesn't care about your goals. It's just it's not really your true identity. It's kind of it's your survival instinct, and it just goes to, it wants dopamine. It just wants to be soothed, and it wants to be comforted. And it doesn't care about what your goals are. And so a lot of us, we need to always try to live in our frontal lobe, and not and try to deal with that part of our brain that's not really our true identity. It's just that part of our brain that's itching at us to say, hey, I'm stressed, I didn't get enough sleep, I can't handle this, I gotta eat something. So that's emotional eaters. And then taking that a step further, food addiction. And so food addiction would just be kind of, that would be amplified. And some people can, there's people that can, you always hear about people that, oh, I had a stressful day, I'm gonna have a couple of little squares of dark chocolate, and that kind of quells that kind of, oh, I really craved that dark chocolate, and just a little bit of sweet, and they can have a square or two, and they're fine, they can get back on track. But then there's people that if they even did that, they would eat a whole bag of cookies, they would eat a whole half gallon of ice cream, where they can't control it. And they know it's bad for their health, and it's not going to help them with their goals, yet they can't stop doing it. That is the actual definition of addiction. So it's not good for you, it's harmful, but you can't stop. And so that's when we fall into the food addiction. And food addiction is a real specialty. It's a real, in psychology, it's a real thing. And anyone that thinks they're into that food addiction end of the spectrum, they need the same support as anybody would with addiction to heroin or to methamphetamines or alcohol. So they need the same support, 12-step process. They need ongoing counseling, ongoing management, support from their friends and family, all of that. And that, what's so hard about food addiction is, it's like, well, yeah, maybe it's not quite at the same level harm wise in the immediate future, because it's not like you could die of a fentanyl overdose or heroin overdose or something like that. It's not maybe as dangerous in the short term, it's dangerous in the long term. But also what makes it so hard is because we might, if, like, let's say you had a friend that was an alcoholic, would you like say, hey, come with me to the bar, I'm gonna have a drink, but I know you're not alcoholic, you won't drink, but would you mind hanging out with me and going there? Or even if you went there and you knew they're alcoholic, would you say, oh, just have one drink, you'll be fine? You're not going to go down that slippery slope. We never do that, right? Or if someone was a smoker, would we say, oh yeah, I'm going to have a cigarette, and do you want one? I know you quit a while back, but just one would be okay. We wouldn't do that either, right? But what do we do with people that we don't always know who's an emotional eater versus a normal eater versus a food addict? But we say, oh, I made these cookies for you. Will you have one? Or you go to a potluck, or you go just visit friends and family. The pressure's there. I'm eating one, so you should eat one. Like, oh, I bought these donuts for everyone, but really they bought them because they want to eat them, and they're just trying to share it with everybody else. Generally, they're doing it because they want an excuse to eat it themselves. And so but you never know, even if you aren't an emotional eater or a food addict, but you bought them for everyone in the office, kind of a thing. It's almost like saying, oh, there could be an alcoholic in here, and I'm buying drinks for everybody, even though they weren't expecting there to be drinks there. And so it's a really tough area, because you don't know who's got issues and what area of the spectrum that they might be. And so I'm just bringing that up because we have to really be conscious of other people around us that might not, that might trigger some of these kinds of foods. Whereas it's what's so hard about it is it's so normalized in our society to eat these types of foods that it's normal. Whereas we wouldn't do that with alcohol or drugs or other kinds of addictions. And so I think it's that point's really important to make. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so when you're trying to treat food addiction, you need to first detoxify and learn about their disease. Often psychological issues do not become obvious until food addicts have been abstinent for a long period of time. So it's this way with any kind of a drug. You can't even really deal with why you're choosing these foods and why you're kind of addicted to these foods, until you know what your triggers are and how to deal with it until you've been off the foods for a long time. It can take weeks, months sometimes. That's why it's so important to have counseling, have support, and be off of those substances. Just keep them out of your home. So you want to have a safe environment, just like someone that's trying to quit smoking. They're not going to have cigarettes laying around. They're going to have them out of the house. And so you want to be able to do the same thing when it comes to foods that might be unhealthy and triggering you. And so that's really important. And then food addicts are always in recovery. You must identify and avoid triggers. So this is from these quotes and bullet points are from Vera Tarman's book, Food Junkie. She's a psychiatrist, and that this book's on the website under the book section. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a really good book. And then, so some of the recommendations, so having supportive friends and family, consider behavioral health counseling. Another good book is by another psychiatrist named Judson Brewer, The Craving Mind, which is another book on there, along with the Food Junkies one. And so one of the things that was really important, I think, with different kinds of diets, and I know that we've talked about this before, is that other types of diets like Weight Watchers and some of the and low carb keto kind of diets, a lot of times they'll have products that you can, like, oh, this is a low carb dessert bar, or Weight Watchers has, oh, here's these little treats, cookies are worth this many points, and they kind of allow you to have those foods. And even though you're mostly eating healthy foods, but a lot of those kinds of diets tend to allow foods that are triggering foods that are unnaturally high in sugar, salt, and fat. Even though it's just a small, tiny little portion, that can be devastating for some people, because, like, oh, I'll use up all my points for the day on these little bars, and then I'll eat a salad or something, and so they're not really even treating the root cause of their food addiction. And one of the things with whole food plant based, if you're doing it 100%, you're avoiding all the processed foods, all the foods high in sugar, salt, and fat, and you're just eating the fruits, the vegetables, the beans, the intact whole grains, the nuts and seeds, all those foods. There's no foods in there in those scenarios where they're going to likely be triggering foods, or foods that are going to allow you to, like, oh, now I had this peach, now I'm going to go buy a Snickers bar or something like that. So don't generally cause those kinds of triggering things. So whereas other diets, when people try to portion control or do Weight Watchers or certain diets, those types of diets tend to allow people to still consume some of the foods that are triggering for them, and that's not going to be helpful. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, that's behavior change. So I think what I wanted you to hopefully take out of this part is, understanding the science of why we crave high calorie dense foods that flood the dopamine from a physiologic standpoint, and then understanding that, because that's what, someone that snorts cocaine or heroin, they're flooding their brain with dopamine the exact same way, and you can see it's the same part of the brain, and so we have to kind of treat it the same, with the same support you would give for any other kind of addiction. And I think that's what I hope you take away from that part. So any questions about kind of food addiction and kind of the spectrum of normal eating, emotional eating, food addiction types of issues? Anyone have any questions, comments about that? I think it's really important. Yeah. 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 So the question is, like, are the different kinds of sweeteners, whether it's honey or different kinds of sweeteners, would those be some of them more or less likely to be triggering? And my guess is probably no, because anything that's unnatural. And so, if you walked around, except for the honey was the only example, if you walked around in nature, that none of that exists in nature. Whereas fruit doesn't tend to, nobody tends to go, when they're stressed, go to the grocery store at 2 o'clock in the morning and buy a bunch of fruit and binge on fruit, right? Doesn't usually happen. It's going to be the ice cream and the candy and things that are, because the fruit isn't going to really flood dopamine at the same level. If you're, you ate nothing but you didn't eat fruit for a week and you're eating just all savory foods, man, that fruit's going to really, sweet fruit's going to really, it is going to hit dopamine pretty hard. But but Rainier cherries once a year. So I mean, but up here rather than way up here, right? Because your dopamine sensitivity has come down to a more natural level. Whereas it's like when you're way up here all the time, it's that chasing the dragon thing where you gotta you're not gonna really, it's not gonna do it for you unless you go back up here again. And it's kind of like another example. I think it was actually Doug Lyle, one of his talks from Pleasure Trap, is like if you walk into a room at Christmas time at someone's house, you're going to visit them at Christmas time, you smell the pine of the Christmas tree, right? That really smells good, that Christmas tree. But after like 10 or 15 minutes, you don't even smell it anymore, right? Because our brain can't, it has to filter that out. It's like our brain just can't focus on something like that stimulation, like, oh, that smells really good, and but because it's too distracting, our brain like turns the gain way down, and because we need to focus on other things. But then you're out of the house for a while and then you come back in, you kind of smell it again. So that's kind of what happens with when you're eating donuts. That first bite of a donut is way more pleasurable than the 10th bite, right? And so it's the same thing. Your dopamine was way up here on the first bite or two, and then it starts to kind of, the gain gets turned way down because our brain has to pay attention to so many things that just can't do that. But then when somebody, that's why if you're hitting the cocaine, like a lot of times people will snort cocaine, and then after a while that's not enough anymore, so then they freebase it, and so then they inject it because it's going to be more concentrated that way. Or another example is like chewing on a coke like a cocoa plant, and what cocaine comes from, and that's a little bit of a stimulation, but it's kind of a little bit more natural because it's in nature. But then you cook it down into a crystalline powder, and then you snort it, and it goes immediately into your bloodstream. So you get it's more intense, and so it's always trying to hit that higher intensity. And so I would say, if you have sugar issues, and that's why flour is the same way. Flour can be just as addicting because it's the surface area. So think about that again with the cocaine plant. You turned it into powder, just like you turn a wheat berry into flour. So eating something that's why bread can be a little more addicting than, we might crave bread more than we crave eating a bowl of groats or something like that, right? Because the bread is more calorie dense, more concentrated, so a little bit less natural, a little bit more processed. So it can be that way with any processed food. So that's why keeping the calorie density 400 or 500 calories a pound and all that, like we talked about in the first part of this lecture, is what's going to be, well, not only healthier and less spikes in insulin and sugar and all that, and be less likely to want to crave it, because that's that whole thing. Like the other book too, it's on the book list, is Sugar, Salt, and Fat by Michael Moss. That's another really good one because it's basically shows the food industry, the smartest, brightest food chemists that come out of school. They hire them at these companies, Kraft and all these different food companies, to have just the right amount of sugar, salt, and fat, the right mouth feel, all the things that are going to make us not be able to just eat one, right? To get us addicted to it, really, because they're just trying to sell the product, and that's what it's all about, and that's all trying to just hit that dopamine, try to get us hooked on it. So that's real important. Yeah, Marcia. Yes, the question is, can you be a combination of all those eaters, normal eater, an emotional eater, and a food addict? Yeah, I mean, if someone's a full-on food addict, then they probably have a hard time ever being a normal eater. But which meaning like they could have just a couple squares of dark chocolate and then they're fine with that. They're not likely a true food addict if they can do that. But I think there's just some blurry overlay between, probably more so between normal eaters and emotional eaters. Is probably a pretty good chunk of people, pretty good percentage. And then the people that are kind of on the edge of emotional eating and food addiction is probably a smaller percentage, but it's probably a lot more. I bet it's more people than you think that have those issues, because, and it's not their fault. I mean, there are genetic predispositions. We all know people that They were an alcoholic, they gave that up, but now they have gambling addiction, or now they have food addiction, or now they have sex addiction. So there definitely addiction genes that people have. And so there are people that are more predisposed to some of these things, and if they go from one addict, they give up one addiction and they go to another one, and they can just bounce around. So there is also a genetic component to this, but who has a chance when our whole food culture is all these highly palatable, hyper palatable foods, unnatural foods, high in sugar, salt, and fat. We don't have a chance out there. That's why we gotta have our own safety environment in our own home to have all only good food choices there. And then yeah, so here's a behavior change. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. So I'm going to get into behavior change since we have time, but I also wanted to leave it open for questions, discussion, even more, just more about eating behavior and food addiction and some of that. Do you have something to add?
So I was listening to Heather McDougall this morning talking with another, I don't know who it was. I didn't listen that closely. But they were talking about potatoes, potatoes as a solution for weight loss. And they were talking about cravings. And their solution to cravings is make a bunch of potatoes and eat them until you're stuffed. Potatoes, I think, have an average calorie density that you talk about 500. So you fill yourself up and your craving levels go way down. You don't have to go for those chips with all the oil and the other kinds of things. So I thought it was kind of an interesting, quick take on what a practical thing that people could try to deal with cravings. Has anyone found that to be the case? Have they had the potato solution? Yes.
Oh, really? And the healthier potatoes would be like the Yukon Golds, the reds, the sweet potatoes, the yams, rather than the white russet, just because it's a little higher in the glycemic index. So higher in fiber for the other ones. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, good. So yeah, so everyone has different levels of sweetness, and depending on how their overall diet is, so it's your taste buds do change, and so you could even like the good example is like if you switched from anybody ever switched from whole milk to skim milk. It's like what did the skim milk seem like water, right? It was gross when you were used to whole milk, and then after a few weeks, a few months of skim milk, you got used to it, and then all of a sudden someone gave you a glass of whole milk again, you'd be like, oh, this is like thick and it's like it's good because your tastes change, and so it's going to be the same thing with sweet, with salty, with seasonings, things like that, spicy, all that kind of stuff. You can train your palate, and so that's all part of that as well. Yeah.
I just have a couple more things I want to share with you. One of them is if the potatoes don't work like they did for Ed, um, if the potatoes don't work, you see this here? We all know about our phones and how much we're on our phones. If I've got this craving and I just have to have a food and I've stuffed myself with healthy foods, but then I know there is this little piece square of chocolate or little piece of chocolate that keeps calling my name and I can't stand it any longer. I've got to do something to solve that craving without feeling like I'm a bad person. What do I do? Yeah. So I take a small bit. Remember how I used to take a whole Snickers bar, talk with my wife, watch TV, get on the phone, do all those things. When I got done with the Snickers bar, it was like I didn't want it, it's gone. I need more. I didn't get the satisfaction I needed. So what do I do now if I have that craving that I just can't get rid of? I go into the room by myself. I close the door. My phone is out of the room. I'm just alone with my treat. And my mouth is starting to water as I think about that taste, and I put it in my mouth, and I'm focusing my full attention. I'm truly meditating through this. And I don't need 10 of these pieces of chocolate after that. Yes. So I have one more thing that I need to add. And that is for those of you who may be newly transitioning to a whole food plant based, and Scott made a point of this, that the foods don't taste the same. And, you know, they're kind of disappointing. But if you could kind of think about this analogy, which I do all the time, is you're used to eating the standard American diet, which has this high fat, salt, and sugar to the bliss point he was talking about. That gives you your maximum kick of dopamine or whatever. So you're used to eating that. And you come to one of these classes and you listen to what Scott has to say or what I had to say or what other people. And you say, I think I want to do this because I think it's a healthy thing to do. So I'm all in. So you go all in and you miss all that salt, sugar, fat, right? And your pleasure has gone from this level to where? Does it go up or down when you start eating? It goes down. And after a few days, you say to yourself, you know, I felt better when I was eating the crap, calorie rich and processed foods. And it's easy. I've seen people who just transition right back to that say, this couldn't be healthy. But the reality is, if you keep eating the low calorie density foods, even though your pleasure will drop for a couple few weeks, it will come right back up to baseline. Just like if you're walking down the street and you find the donut shop on your side here, and you walk into the donut shop and they close the door on you, you're trapped. The first day you're in the donut shop, it's wonderful. Wow, my mouth's watering thinking about all the donuts and cream inside that I'm eating. And so, but by the third day, your pleasure starts dropping down to this baseline again. So if you can just stick with it, if you're new to this, try to keep your focus that even though you may not feel so great the first few weeks, just keep with it. And if you need someone to counsel, call us.
And then just to say again, there are people that can't eat the square 1 or 2 squares of chocolate. That'll trigger them, and then they go to the grocery store and buy ice cream and a bunch of crap. So again, you have to know where you are. You have to know yourself, know what your triggers are. But I think the key is that the more you eat a whole food plant-based diet and you learn about it, and your dopamine kind of comes back to kind of normal levels, you're less likely to have those kinds of things happen, but they can still happen. So it's really important to kind of know that there's people that can do the couple squares and people that can't do that. And so you just have to be respectful and know who those people are. Yeah. So, well, the darkest chocolate, so 70% or higher, because it's going to be really high in antioxidants, and there's not a lot of sugar in there, and so it's so if you want that chocolate fix, then that's it. But as long as you can not eat a whole bar of chocolate, kind of thing. Yeah. Yes, Ed. Cacao nibs. I guess it would depend on if it's dark chocolate and what's the percent of cacao. Yeah. And you have to look at the ingredients list because sometimes they'll have milk chocolate in them, and they'll have, because cocoa butter is not butter. It's just the kind of the cream of the cocoa. Yeah, so like like in my oat groats, I usually put like a teaspoon of just dark cocoa powder in there just to have that chocolatey and that because there's no sugar in that. It's just cocoa powder. But next, go ahead and go to the next slide. You guys want to do a little bit of behavior change, or you want to keep discussing some behavior change? Okay, go to the next slide. 100% chocolate. That's even better. Yeah, I can do the 70%, but yeah, much more than that. 85 is even pretty. So behavior change theme. So we have motives, we have self-regulation, resources, habits, and environmental social influences. So when we're thinking about a behavior change, we have what's motivating us, what's our why. So why do I want to make a behavior change, whether it's nutrition related or other lifestyle medicine pillars related, kind of doesn't matter. So you're thinking about a behavior change, you want to have your motivations, and so your why. So I want to get off medications, I want to be healthier, I want to have more energy, I want to be able to do that hike, I want to play with my grandkids, I want to, whatever your why is, that's important. And then self-regulation is basically, we need support systems and stuff, and we'll talk about that. But self-regulation is basically your own self-efficacy, you're the captain of your own ship, right? So oh, I they brought that food, and so I didn't want to make them feel bad, so I ate it. So well, that's still on you, right? I mean, it's up to you to educate your friends and family that, hey, I'm working on eating a more plant-based diet, so this isn't going to help me reach my health goals, and so that they can be respectful and not be offering you those types of things. And it's always a balance, but what the purpose of that is that they're not taking the spoon and shoving it in your mouth, making you chew it, making you do it. You have to take your own personal responsibility. You're the captain of your own ship. And then having resources. So again, coming to classes and all the education and having coming and having the come in class to regulate, help regulate you, to have that kind of what's the word I'm looking for, when people are checking on you, you accountability. Yes. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. You have that accountability. And so having those resources around you are really important. And then forming habits. And we're going to have a whole section on habits coming up. And then environmental and social influences. And so it's, again, like with the Blue Zones, if you guys read the Blue Zones book and the whole Blue Zones project, what they're trying to do with that is making the healthier choice the easier choice. So like having, walking paths and having healthy food choices at restaurants and grocery stores and things like that. So creating a healthy environment around you so that the healthy choice is the easy choice. And some of that goes into that is, having a distractor. So like if you don't have any bad choices in your home and you're having one of those, having a craving, I'd have to get in the car, I'd have to drive to Dairy Queen, or I'd have to drive to the store. And so by the time you actually did that, a lot of times some cravings will go away. And the Craving Mind book by Jensen Brewer, which I had on a slide earlier, really goes over that really well and talks about how it's like a craving can be like riding a surfboard to the shore. So like you're getting a craving, and so you get up on the surfboard and you ride the wave to the shore, because usually most cravings only last 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. And so if you start journaling about writing down, why am I having this craving, what's going on today, and you kind of, instead of giving into it, and maybe once in a while you'll give into it because we're not perfect, but at the same time writing about the craving and why I'm having it, by the time you get through that, a lot of times the craving's gone. And because there was no choice in your home to do that, you did something else, something different. Because sometimes people will say, this is from Judson Brewer too, that because he's had really good success getting people to quit smoking, and we used to always say, well, instead of having a couple squares of dark chocolate, have an apple instead, or eat an apple and go for a walk. And so there's some truth and some good strategy behind doing that. If you're having a really strong craving, replacing it with something healthier. But at the same time, Judson Brewer talks how the science really shows that that's not always the best thing to do, because you're not still addressing why you had the craving in the first place. Yeah, one addiction to the other, even though the newer one was a healthier choice. So that would be something maybe to give into once in a while doing it that way, but it's more important to figure out, well, why am I having this craving? What happened today? What's going on? And so then you learn about yourself and figure out what triggered me today, and actually write about that. And that's what's been shown to be more effective in the long term. So having those environmental social influences, yeah, go to the next slide. And then I won't bore you with these. These are the 6 stages of behavior change. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, termination. So these are just kind of more for those of us that are educate people on behavior change. And we get even in standard medical training, we get a lot of this because people are, whether they're, of course, we're not trained on how to help people change their diet and things like that because we don't learn about nutrition, but quitting smoking or drinking or things like that, people are in different levels of stages of change. Like, oh, I'm thinking about it, but not ready yet. And so you're always reassessing. Every single time I see a patient, every visit, I'm going through this list and to see where they are with whether it's even to take a medication as an option for blood pressure or cholesterol, whatever. Even if they already heard a million times from me about lifestyle medicine and nutrition, they even sometimes just thinking about starting a medication or going for counseling or any kind of behavior change, you have to kind of be aware of where your friend, your family member, your patient, where they are on this spectrum of behavior change. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then let's talk a little bit about habits. It's pretty small back there. I don't know if you guys can read this. So what are habits? And so a habit refers to how you perform an action, not what the action is. And so we always need to have a motivation to make a behavior change, but we're always trying to make something a habit. And we all know about habits, right? So what is a habit? Does anyone have kind of a working definition of what they feel like a habit is? As far as how is like a habit different from just any other action that we do every day? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That habit turns into what your character.
That's a great definition. And so a habit, so you start doing an action, a change of a behavior, doing an action, and you have thought behind it and a reward behind it. But then after a while, you've done it so many times, you don't really even think about the reward anymore. And it's you're so ingrained in doing it, you don't expect a reward, you don't think about it, you don't even have pre-thought on doing it anymore because it's just a habit. So like, for example, like, after I get out of the shower at night, I brush my teeth. And it's like, and I've done that for years. And so I don't even have a forethought. I just get out of the shower and I brush my teeth. And it's like to the point where it's like I don't even, even really even think about doing it. So it's just you've done it so many times that you don't have to be rewarded for it anymore. You don't have to think about it, like, oh, I need to do that. Oh yeah, I need to brush my teeth. It's like, no, it just automatically, it's a reflex. You just do it. And that's what a habit is, and that's what we're trying to do with all of these food choices, food changes. We do it so long. I mean, at this point, for 13, 14 years, I don't even have a thought or a thought of eating, an animal product, for example. Yeah, maybe a processed vegan food. I'm still dealing with that. Like, oh, this is, I go to Sweet Life, and oh, this is a egg-free, dairy-free cookie. I'm gonna have one once in a while, and they still do. So that's a thought. And I'm having to, if I want to make a habit of never doing that, just never do it, then at some point I probably won't even think about doing it. But it's been 14 years, it hasn't happened. So I mean, it's just, whatever your behavior change is, you do it enough times. Is kind of the point of this, is doing it enough times to where you don't even have to think about that there's a reward because, oh, I'm gonna be healthier if I eat this. I mean, even now when I eat for breakfast every day, it's like it's always what I eat, and it's not like I'm being rewarded for it. It's just what I like, and it's just what I've eaten, and it's just done it for so long. I don't even think about it anymore. So that's a habit. That's an example of a habit. So 43% of the time, our actions are habitual. So we're good at developing habits. Goals and rewards are critical for starting to build a habit, but do not help to make habits stick. So kind of explain that already. Whereas maybe initially, I know that, okay, if I brush my teeth, every day, a couple times every day when I go to the dentist and my teeth are gonna be healthy and my breath's better. And, so you think about what's the benefit of brushing your teeth, but then after a while, you don't even think about that anymore. You just do it because it's now a habit. So there's a big disconnect between what we know and what we do. And so there's a good quote where, our health is determined by habits, not by like our conscious choices. It's actually determined by the habits that we form. So that's always going to be the goal is to make new habits. And one of the books on the book list is Good Habits, Bad Habits. I think it's Wendy Wood. And so it's a really good book to read. So in taming bad habits, knowledge and willpower are not effective. So when we have bad habits, it's because it's so, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit, it's so ingrained that we do it, that even though we know it's bad for us and we think about it, you trying to use willpower and knowledge, they're not going to be effective. So it's just, you have to break the habit by just not doing it enough times and do something else that's a better action that's going to be better for our health. You have to just develop new habits, and hopefully we can crowd out the bad habits. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So forming habits. So here's some other quotes here. So our mind is not picky, just give it repetition, rewards, and context. So that's about what we talked about starting a habit. We need to have a reward in the context for starting a habit, but then just give it repetition. Our mind isn't picky, just keep doing it over and over and over. Habits form when we act repeatedly without planning and deliberating. So kind of talked about this already. Habits come from repetition. Behavior begets behavior. If you just keep doing it, it'll start happening with more and more ease. And it's all about the environment. So I was talking about earlier, having healthy choices be the easy choices. So whatever it is, so that like the whole Blue's thing we talked about. Building the right environment is key. Make the right choice the easy choice, and make the wrong choice the more difficult one, which is the disruption I talked about earlier, where you gotta get in the car, you gotta go somewhere to make a bad choice. And I know my wife did this for a while, and she definitely has food addiction issues, and she's spoken at these classes years ago about it. And early on, because she would be somebody that could go buy, like, eat all the Halloween candy in the car and see in private, and then go buy more Halloween candy to replace what she ate, or eat a whole package of donuts or something like that in private, those kinds of things. And so when she was dealing with those kinds of things, one thing that worked for her was she would actually, in some of the whole food plant-based cookbooks, she would make some of the plant-based cookies and some of the desserts, because one, even though they're still pretty high in calorie density, they still have some sugar, they're still way better options than the box of donuts, the Snickers bars, the ice cream, all that stuff. And so that dopamine was way here. The whole food plant-based desserts were a little bit lower, but down here. And then when she really, instead of driving in the car to go get those foods and eat it in secret, she would, okay, I'm gonna make a batch of these plant-based cookies. And so then she got to where she wouldn't even need to eat the whole thing. She would just eat, a couple, 2-3 cookies, and that was like her methadone. That's a good way to think it. So she wasn't ready to be. She couldn't just be 100% of the time off of all of it 100%. So she would, okay, that was the disruption. Okay, I'm not gonna drive, go get that. I'm gonna make these cookies. So she had to do that. And while she was doing that, she was probably, the cravings were kind of easing a little bit, and she still have a cookie or two, but then she would do that less and less over time, where she would need to make those things. And so it really helped her on that journey to kind of, it's like somebody that's doing nicotine patches to quit smoking, or methadone to kick a heroin habit, or it's kind of like that. And so could be a good strategy, even though, now if your goal is just to lose weight and stuff, then yeah, you don't probably want to eat too many of the plant-based desserts and stuff, because they're really high in calories and stuff like that. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about, behavior change, and we're talking about food addiction, things. Okay, next slide. Yeah, good habits, bad habits by Wendy Wood. So if we persist to do something, even though we don't value the reward as much, or the reward is no longer available, then it's a habit. So just that example like I gave on the brushing teeth, so. So that's kind of sums up that next slide. Yeah, and then if you really wanna, dig deep into the willpower instinct and kind of how the brain works with that. Just drawing a blank on her name, it's she's the Stanford, I have it right here on the website.
Kelly McGonigal.
Yeah, Kelly McGonigal. So Kelly McGonigal is on our video section on livelifestylemedicine.com. You can watch this willpower instinct video. But that's what I had. Questions, comments? It's a big topic and we spent a lot of time on it, but just hoping you take away a little bit about the difference between normal eating, emotional eating, food addiction, support you need for the food addiction aspect especially, and then the importance of behavior change and how complicated that is, because really that's, it's one thing to know what to do, but then it's a whole other thing to do it, right? Yeah.
So a couple of years back, of course, longer than I probably a couple, but we had a son who was a meth addict. And so I did a lot of research, and there's a man, he's a general practitioner, his name is Gabor Mate, and he does a whole section on he does several talks on addictions and what they do and how they're learning how to overcome addictions and those things. But one of the things kept on repeating, and a lot of people that I was looking at gathering the information, is that this, like you guys were talking about, this doesn't hit the frontal lobe. This is in more of the emotional part of the brain. And if you can get them to get to that frontal lobe and logical thinking, then it actually takes them out of the power realm that the drug or the addiction has the greatest hold or the greatest power over. And so it's just a matter of keeping them in that realm.
That's great point, yeah.
But yeah, and then there's a lot of neuroscience too now that is talking, kind of like we were talking, it's almost like replacement theology, but at the same time, it's more than that. It's actually knowing and understanding how the brain works, and that those pathways that get used for that you actually need to. It's the whole thing of like when you were criticizing a child, for every one bad thing you say, negative thing to them, you have to replace it with 10 positive. And so it's the same sort of a concept too.
Yeah, and it's good with the willpower instinct. They talk a lot about. She talks about how she taught the class at Stanford, and there people are like, well, who is really me? So it's kind of like trying to figure out, because it's you're a different person. So someone that's addicted to something or is living in there, or even just stress, not even food.
Yeah.
Somebody's in a constant state of stress all the time, that's not really their true personality.
Right.
They're just in their midbrain. They're not their personality, their goals, their thoughts, those things are all in the frontal part of the brain. And that's what their real person is, the person that wisdom, that every life experience, everything is there. And so when you're not getting sleep, you're stressed, all these things are happening to you, it's not really you. I mean, that's not really your actual personality. So I think that's kind of important, and it's being able to figure out, okay, what do I got to do to get myself out of that fight or flight, get myself out of that part of my brain and get back to really who I am. Yeah, and that takes a lot of work, and but I think it's also recognizing that you're learning yourself that, hey, this is. My cravings don't define me. That's just something I'm feeling right now. Those are my feelings, and we own our feelings. We don't have to apologize for them, but we want to learn about them, understand them, whether it's journaling about them, therapy, friends, family, whatever we got to do to kind of talk through that and be true to ourselves. We're not apologizing for our emotions. We're just recognizing them and just respecting them, being, grateful or great praise, give ourselves grace and all those things.
The truth will set you free. Right? And a lot of times with trauma, what happens is we create what they call guilty truths, right? And that's again where we get like an emotional part of our brain, and they aren't necessarily true at all. There could be a partial truth in it, but it's not true at all.
Like Pam Burrell, the psychologist, when she teaches her class, talks about Joan, the person that's their inner critic, and so what's Joan saying about me today?
Yeah.
These kinds of things. So these are, this would be a great topic for her, because she talks a little bit about stuff too, even with behavior change too. So. Other questions? Yeah.
So one of the things I'm on is magnesium. And I had heard that magnesium or having it can help with like chocolate cravings, or if you're craving. Anyway, I don't know if there's a connection. I don't know what's true anymore. You know, there are these different
Right.
things, but
And
I
this
was-
say chocolate was in, magnesium was in chocolate, that's why
Yeah.
women crave it, right?
But I was just curious, you know, when you are trying to overcome the sugar things, if there's certain things that are healthy that still kind of help you either level out your blood sugar or can help kind of offset that a little. That's, or if it's just literally.
You do the fruit.
Yeah.
But again, figure out if you're craving something, then figure out the why. You know, right? That's we all have those kinds of things. Right? Yes.
So one little trick that I do for myself, I have a habit that I want to change. If you think of it as being, gee, I've got to change this habit forever, it seems overwhelming. But what I do is I say, well, I'm not going to do this for just one day, just for today. And so then if I succeed for the day, then the next day, well, I'm just gonna do this for one day. And eventually you can get to the point where you have a different habit form to replace that undesirable one.
That's great. That's a great point. If everyone hear that, okay, that kind of falls into what we call the SMART goals. And so, you know, with behavior change, Charlie and I, you know, they actually taught us a lot about that in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, the board certification. You know, having reasonable goals, measurable, they're achievable, those kinds of things, realistic, time centered. So you kind of like say, okay, instead of saying, well, I've been sedentary, I'm gonna walk 10 miles this week. Well, that's maybe a little bit too much to start off with. So it's like, okay, you know, maybe for the next week, I'm gonna walk for 10 minutes a day. And that'd be something that, okay, that's I can do that. And then so you take off that little bite and you do that for a week. And then after that week, you can reassess, maybe I'll do 15 minutes a day, or so you whether it's exercise or eating a certain way, or even like sometimes when people are thinking about going more plant-based, I say, well, try to have one plant-based meal a week. Try that for a month and see how that goes. Or, you know, you can let the person choose their goal, because they're going to be one that's going to come up with the best idea that's attainable for them. But it kind of feeding into what you're saying there is kind of have a smaller, more realistic goal. And then after you've done it enough times and you get to where you want to go, then you know, maybe you don't keep progressing at some point, but you're still way better than you were, you know, a month ago or 6 months ago. So you can kind of, wow, look at where I was, look where I am now, even if oh gosh, I haven't developed a habit for at least doing this many minutes, or I have a habit of eating this many plant-based meals. Maybe, you know, maybe you're ready to go further, or maybe you're just, hey, this is great for now. Look at what I've achieved. I've developed some habits that are healthy. I don't know if that's kind of feeding in what you're saying there. Yeah. So having realistic goals is really important. And Charlie and I are also, I don't know, I'm probably in the same boat. He's talked about this too, and I've kind of progressed over the last, you know, I've been teaching classes here now 8 years. And so the way I was even 8 years ago compared to now, I was more of just an educator and, oh, you should do this. And I would always be coming up with the plan for the patient. Oh, you should do this. Here's this resource. Why don't you do this and come back in a month to see how you do. I would just be the one telling them what to do. And what I've learned through more education over time over these last 8 years is, now that's not what I should do. I should actually let the person come up with the plan. Yeah, they've got enough education, they know kind of what to do, but let them come up with a plan. I just be the cheerleader, I'm the coach. So you're the one who'll do it, it's kind of, we call it motivational interviewing, where you just actually say, hey, but what do you think is gonna work for you? What do you feel like you could do? Or what do you wanna do? What are your goals? And let them come up with the plan, because then they have ownership in it. They came up with it, they're owning it, and they're much more likely to execute it if they came up with a plan, rather than me telling them, hey, here, I was always kind of, well, I'm just trying to make it easy for them. Oh, just do X, Y, Z, here you go. And to me, kind of made sense at the time, but I've learned that no, that wasn't the right thing to do. Actually, it's better to just give a little bit of information, answer any questions they might have. But you come up with a plan. What's going to work for you, because you're the expert on your life. I'm not the expert on your life. So what are your challenges? What's going to work for you? And that's something you've kind of talked about too, Charlie. You know.
And if you need to tweak it, then you can.
Yeah, and that's also.
Wait a week before.
Yeah.
It's the doctor to have him tweak it for you.
Yeah, that was also on one of the slides on the stages of change, is having a relapse plan. That's just as important. So like if you're doing great, everything's going along, you're in the action phase, you're making changes, but then, okay, well, what are you gonna do when someone comes you go to a potluck for a family gathering and this is there, what are you gonna do in that situation? So you actually think ahead of what's, because those are the things that are gonna come up. So what is gonna be your plan? Let the person come up with it. What do you think is gonna work for you? Instead of just, oh, I'm just gonna eat it, and that might be a plan, but then there's also like, but what are you gonna do in that situation? And let them be honest, what are you gonna do? Because sometimes I also tell people about, well, it's what you do 90% of the time that makes the biggest difference. And so it's kind of like, if you have one bad meal or one bad food choice, what are you gonna do when that happens? Because that's gonna happen sometimes, right? So what are you gonna do? Are you gonna let that bad meal turn into a bad day, into a bad week, into a bad month? Or is it just gonna be, oh, that was one bad choice on that one meal today? What's my next meal gonna be? What am I gonna do next? And that's always good, because if somebody has one bad food choice or a bad meal once every month or something, that's not gonna be nearly as damaging as if they have a bad week, a bad month, just went off the rails, And so that's gonna be a lot more damage than just make a bad choice. So having that reconnaissance, something that, what are you gonna do when this situation happens, is really important.
And something in evaluating is actually think about, because like once you have started something like that, or like you said, your spike, your dopamine level has dropped also. So then when you go to a pop like it, it's like, oh, that does look good. And you go to taste it, it's like, oh my goodness, what is this?
So sweet. Going back to my wife when she did the plant-based things,
Yeah.
she would occasionally, when she was still working, she would actually take the plant-based desserts that she made. She would actually take them sometimes to share with her colleagues, and they were like, "Oh, it's not very sweet. This is terrible." So it made her realize that, and they were like, "Oh," because they're eating at their desk was like M&M, exactly.
Yeah.
She gave an example, M&M peanuts and all these other things there, and they were eating those all the time. And then they tasted the plant-based cookie, like, "Oh, this isn't sweet at all. This is awful."
Yeah.
It's like kind of made her realize, wow, to her that's super sweet. It's
Right,
super decadent, but so it's her taste to change. And so it's a good example of that again. And next week is the last class 13, which is the physical activity. So Kathy Meldrum, the physical therapist, will be here. That's the last one of this series. And then since Tamara has had her family member health issue, she's taking a break right now. So normally we do the 4-week cooking class between the 13-week cycles, but we haven't decided. I think Tamara and Trish and Debbie are thinking about putting something together to have people can come here and socialize. Maybe someone that wants to demonstrate what they like to eat. So there might be something coming, but if not, it'll be a 4-week break, and then the next 13-week class cycle will start on Tuesday, June 23rd. That'll be the next 13-week cycle. First, Charlie still has his classes on Wednesdays and Thursdays going on. And then you probably saw does everyone in here get the newsletter on Sunday mornings? So you probably saw other stuff coming up. We've got the grocery store shopping tour a week from Thursday at Winco Foods. So you can send emails it's in the newsletter. My email is swagnon1969@gmail.com. If you want to attend that. So Karen Booth, she's a dietitian. She always leads that. So that'll be coming up on Thursday. That's I think it's the 21st. So a week from this Thursday. And then the next walk is on Saturday, 23rd. Then we have movie night here on the 30th. And we're gonna show Dr. Gregor's the How Not to Die documentary. We'll show that here, so popcorn. So that's there. And then you probably saw also in June, as always, with partnering up with Eugene Veggies, we have the potluck, the summer picnic over at Highland Park in Springfield, where we always have it. So look, yeah, read the email or newsletter from this Sunday morning. They're all those things coming up. So hopefully you guys will attend that. Those is fun. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Scott.
Yeah.